Thanks, Linda. Nice to see you.
Nice to you. Miss you guys.
Roger, a good day for IPOs this week.
Unbelievable. I mean, Petco, you named it. Petco, everything exploded.
Yeah. I did well. Thank you.
Yes, good.
I'm sure
That's
nobody
fine,
expected
so.
to show up for Shabbat services and get good advice about sound investments, but at Temple Adas Israel, we are a full service.
That's my partial of the week, IPOs.
That's very, very good. It's great to see everybody.
So, Roger, are you making announcements tonight?
Yes, I am. That's why I'm all dressed up.
I was just going to say, he's even more dressed up than I am.
I'm representing the board. I have to take this serious.
Because we're always so dressed up for the board meetings, that's
Yeah.
for sure. Well, it's great to see all of you. It's great to be back for Shabbat, and Shabbat Shalom to those watching and streaming at home. I think we got a minute left, and then I'll mute everybody. So one thing, just to quickly say, I for those that were on the call last week or on our service last week, I accidentally stumbled upon a Zoom function that we hope works the way that we intended to, where both the cantor and I will appear next to each other on the screen instead of one or the other. The only thing I learned for those who are streaming at home is that for some reason or another, it doesn't continue on into the streaming world. So you'll continue to see one or the other. But I think last week I got all excited in the middle of the service, only to realize that everybody watching had no idea what I was excited about. So they just assumed.
Actually, we saw both of you together.
Right. So, and you were in the Zoom though, right, Howard?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's for the people watching the Zoom on the website and stuff like that, where they don't.
Oh, I see.
But
Okay.
in any case, these are technological things for your rabbi to worry about. For all of you, just to be here, to be your wonderful selves, and to forgive me as always for having to mute you all at the moment. And again, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. The only thing, I think we have a few people who were supposed to light our Shabbat candles tonight who I don't yet see available. Cantor, any question? Just a quick question. Do you have candles near you anywhere? If not, I'll go around and get some for me.
I do actually, and I've never used them. So
see, so sometimes it just works that way. And should our friends appear, we will give them their opportunity for sure.
You can put it right here.
But we'll just have them handy and close by, which is good.
I apologize to my mom that they're not polished yet. So please don't be mad.
We will forgive. We will certainly forgive. So I'm going to attempt this spotlighting business here, and then let me add the cantor next to me. So hopefully now you should see both of us side by side. Yes?
Yes, I'm just grabbing some matches.
You go on and do that, and I will continue to talk to our people. Don't you worry about a thing. So in any case, this Shabbat, as we always do every year, and as many congregations across the country, acknowledging what is not certainly a Jewish holiday, but a holiday in which I think the Jewish people, certainly of this land, have a great and important connection on Monday as we acknowledge Martin Luther King Day. And we have a program certainly on Monday night that we'll talk about a little later in the announcements, but we try to also make sure that in the Shabbat prior that we have at least an awareness and orientation towards the significance of Dr. King, the significance of his life, his legacy, his teachings, and also the intersectionality between many of the words, the powerful rhetorical phrases, the connections that he ultimately made in the struggle for civil rights in this country, drawing from familiar material to us, and ultimately speaking of friendships that he developed through his work in the civil rights movement with representatives and members and individuals from the Jewish community as well. So it is certainly part of our service this evening, in particular, in a little bit when we get to our sermon, to share some of Dr. King's words and some of the inspiration that he still continues to bestow upon all of us. So with that in mind, we're going to now turn, and let me just make sure that those that we had thought were going to light are not on the call. We will allow our wonderful cantor Lauren, who again, in a moment's notice, jumps right to it, saves the day, to light and bless our Shabbat candles. And those blessings can be found on page 120 if you'd like to follow along.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של Shabbat.
Amen. And as we give Cantor Lauren just a moment to get herself resituated, we will turn to page 130 as we begin our service together. Or did I skip, Cantor Lauren? You want to do something before we get to Kabbalat Shabbat?
Yeah, we're going to begin on page 128. Thank you, Aaron.
Beautiful. And we'll turn now to page 130 to begin Kabbalat Shabbat. At the very top of the page, L'chu Neranana.
L'chu neranana l'Adonai nariya l'tzorishenu nekadma fanav metoda Mismirot nariya loy ay nay nay ay nay yay nay ay nay yay 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 nay yay 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 nay 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 yay nay nay yay nay yay nay yay nay
And we'll turn now to Shiru Ladonai, page 131.
Sing unto God all the earth a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing along. All the earth a new song unto God. Shiru Adonai, Kol Haaretz. Shiru Adonai, Shir Chadash.
And we'll turn now to page 132, at the very bottom of the page, Or Zarua.
Or Zarua Tzadik, U'leYisrael Lev Simcha. Or Zarua Tzadik, U'leYisrael Lev Simcha.
turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai, at the very top of the page.
Zamru Ladonai bechidor v'kol zimra. Zamru Ladonai bechidor v'kol zimra.
We'll turn now to page 135, Romamu, the last paragraph in Hebrew in the middle of the page. And we'll turn now to page 138 for L'cha Dodi, and just a reminder that we're going to do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs.
L'cha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat kabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor v'dibor echad, tishmiyanu el hamducha, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, l'shemo tiferet v'tchila. L'cha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat kabela. L'cha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat kabela. Likrat Shama lechuven echad, ki mekor haberacha berosh mikdem nesucha. Sof maaseh b'machshavah tchila. L'cha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat kabela. L'cha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat kabela. Hitoreri, ki ba'orem mi'uri, uri shir dameri, kevod Adonai b'tchila. L'cha Dodi likrat בשלום הטרף עלה, גם בשמחה וצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי לקראת חלה, הנה שבה נקבלה, לך דודי לקראת חלה, הנה שבה נקבלה.
And we'll turn now to page 140 to conclude Kabbalat Shabbat with the 92nd Psalm.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב מאוד לאדוני, נזמר לשמך היום, נזמר לשמך היום. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב מאוד לאדוני, נזמר לשמך היום, נזמר לשמך היום. להגיד בבוקר חסדך, באמונתך באלות, עלה הסור מעלינו, עלי היגיון וחידון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב מאוד לאדוני, נזמר לשמך היום, נזמר לשמך היום.
We turn now to page 144, the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ואלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, מחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם על מעמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה, ויתהלל, שמי קודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירם בעלמה, ויאמרו אמן.
We'll turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Baruch Hu et Adonai, HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai, HaMevorach, le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed.
We'll turn now to page 148 and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המרהיב הרבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו למדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו, ובהם נהיה יומם ולילה. מאהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, Adonai Echad.
We're on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בהם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. We'll read together now on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it's eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, and that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. We turn now to page 158, Mi Chamocha.
What
Turn now to the top of page 161, Hashkivenu.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkivenu, Leshalom. Amideinu, Shoreinu Lechaim, Ufros Aleinu, Sukkot Shlomecha, Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu, Leshalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm.
Turn now to page 162.
Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, la'asot et HaShabbat לדורותם בריתותם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתותם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתותם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתותם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתותם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם בריתותם.
On page 164, Cantor Lauren will help us to enter the Amidah with intention, and we'll begin together, and then we will continue silently beginning on the next page as we continue our personal and silent Amidot. And as always, please go at your own pace. And if we should begin before you yourself have finished, the tradition is to continue your Amidah and then catch up to it, us as best as you are able. So Cantor, if you wouldn't mind getting us started again, page 164, and your choice as to rise or remain seated.
Adonai sefatay tifta ufi yitilatecha. Adonai
We'll now turn our minds and our thoughts and our hearts and our pages as we consider those in our lives and those in the world who are in need of healing. And as we turn to page 371, I'll read the names of those that we're thinking of in our community and connected to our community, but I'll also invite those on our Zoom tonight. If you want to share names in the chat, you are welcome to, or simply to hold those close to you in your hearts and minds. But in our community tonight, we're thinking of Chaim Leib, Alyssa Peak, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Phyllis Silver, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Sandra Furman, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skit, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kassoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi. And as we add those names that were shared in the chat and those that we're holding in our hearts and our minds, Cantor Lauren will lead us in the Misha Berach again on page 371. Thank you, Cantor, and we'll give you a little bit of a break here. Hi, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. And as I mentioned, this Shabbat, we try every year in the Shabbat preceding MLK Day on Monday to acknowledge and to connect ourselves to the timeless teachings of Dr. King. And obviously, moments like these, they feel particularly powerful and particularly important to study. So as I was thinking tonight of what to share, obviously, a person as prolific as King wrote more and is more quotable than most people that have existed throughout human history. So trying to identify and to hone in on particular elements is both an incredible opportunity and sometimes a bit of a challenge. But this year, there wasn't really much of a challenge. I immediately thought of actually pulling from King's last, really in essence, last book, the last book that he worked on, which was built, if I'm not mistaken of the timeline, off of a sermon that he delivered in 1967 as he had gathered for the 11th annual SCLC convention in Atlanta, Georgia. And again, I'm not entirely certain of the timeline of whether the sermon came first and the book followed or vice versa, but my guess is, and my assumption is that the sermon came first and then the book. And the book was actually written really in interestingly enough, in isolation. He rented a home in Jamaica, which had no access to phones or anything of that nature. And he really sat down and he was focused in particular on the moments after some of the successes of the civil rights movement. But at the same time, you know, a lot of times in our historical memory of the time period, there is the success of the Voting Rights Act and any number of other victories of the civil rights movement. But we sort of assume that then everything stops. But in reality, King continues to work. And in particular, he continues to work, especially where he eventually is assassinated, is really focusing on a few core issues underlying what he sees to be systematic and systemic challenges that the country ultimately is going to face in the future days. And so he titles the name of the sermon and eventually the name of the book, he adds a cola to it, but he starts by saying, where do we go from here? A simple kind of question. And the book ultimately adds the appendation, chaos or community. So it seems like a particularly important place to start on an evening like this in the week following what we experienced again last week, and we are still reeling from in so many ways. So I wanted to share a few words from both his speech and from the book itself. An invitation that actually the book was out of print for a very long time. I think it only was reissued in 2010, if I remember correctly. That the book is available. It's worth its read, and it's really, again, a rather challenging and nuanced looking forward and at the same time looking back. Again, thinking about where the country was in 1967. So he begins in an important way, and in a way that acknowledges actually or should at least resonate with many of us as we sit here in 2021. And he says, I should have been reminded that the disappointment, or that disappointment in general, produces despair, and despair produces bitterness. And ultimately, that bitterness is certain, and that certainness of the bitterness is in its blindness. And in the days ahead, we must not consider it unpatriotic to raise, therefore, certain basic questions about our national character. While much has been done, it has been accomplished by too few, and on a scale too limited for the breadth of the goal. Freedom is not won by a passive acceptance of suffering. Freedom is won by a struggle against suffering. The absence of brutality and unregenerative evil is not the presence of justice. To stay murder is not the same thing as to ordain brotherhood. So he establishes very, very quickly many of the fundamental questions that King himself is asking in 1967, both on a personal level as a leader of the civil rights movement, which at that point is beginning to not quite fracture, but certainly to refract into a number of different movements, all of which with their own means by which to reach a certain kind of goal. So as I said, some of King's experience at this point is both retrospective and prospective. He's thinking back upon that which has been achieved over the previous years, but also looking out into the future with, I think, an understandable trepidation about where we ultimately go as a country after an experience like the civil rights movement, which itself was after the experience of certainly slavery, Jim Crow, and everything that led up to it. And he acknowledges the fact that in desperation, we have a tendency to become blinded. And it's one of the most important things he says at the very beginning, is that desperation is ultimately self-defeating. It causes us to begin to become myopic, to focus intensely on perhaps one issue or another issue. And what King sees at this point in his life is that really you can't just focus on any one element on its own, because really what we were talking about is something actually much larger. And that sometimes things that feel like a ultimate victory are not ultimate victories, but instead important steps on the way to the ultimate victory of creating, as he says, a truly just society. So I want to go then to his speech. I worked a little bit backwards. That quote was from the book, but to share in the speech itself, because as King was wont to do, and as actually the people for whom he had great reverence, the prophets of our shared tradition, have both the capacity for acknowledging the fundamental flaws, acknowledging the despair, acknowledging the challenge, but at the same time matching all of that with hope and with the possibility of ultimately there being a significant kind of change. So he says, and remember, this is him gathered at the 11th gathering of the SCLC, and ultimately speaking again in Atlanta in 1967, for both, as I said, something of a triumphant celebration and at the same time a very sober and a very real acknowledgement and a reminder to those that had gathered that the fight was still going to continue on, but it simply had to consider itself in a slightly different kind of way. And so he needs to speak to the crowd again by pointing out the challenges, but also imbuing a certain kind of hope in a way that really was uniquely his. So he says to the crowd, "I must confess, my friends, that the road ahead will not always be smooth. There will still be rocky places of frustration and meandering points of bewilderment. There will be inevitable setbacks here and there, and there will be those moments when the buoyancy of hope will be transformed into the fatigue of despair. Our dreams will sometimes be shattered and our ethereal hopes blasted. But difficult and painful as it is, we must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds of despair, and when our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember that there is a creative force in this universe working to pull down the gigantic mountains of evil, a power that is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. Let us realize that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." That last line may be more familiar to most of you than the entirety of the speech, but I invite you, and these are all available really online and accessible, especially through the King Institute's website online, that idea, right, of the long arc of justice speaks to moments in which we feel like sometimes that we are working in a futile fashion, that ultimately all of this work that began certainly before the 60s, but crystallized in that way, and here we are in 2021 feeling like we have made not only not enough progress, but we have even slipped backwards in some regard. But one of King's great gifts was to always give to his supporters, to his followers, to his partners, the sense that there was, in the long run, the overarching idea here is that God has not abandoned us, that our traditions help to guide us, and that with a perseverance, we ultimately can, as he said, overcome the challenges of the time and the challenges, quite frankly, of all time. And I think that it dovetails very nicely with our portion this week as we read in Parshat Shemot, and in the book of Shemot in Parshat Vayera, the second chapter of the book, that we begin actually with something really very important. Moses is deeply concerned that God's plan is not going to work, that God's words are not going to be heeded, that he's not the right person for the task. And so God appears, Va'era, at the beginning of this portion to Moshe with one important idea, which is to remind him, and through him to remind the people of the covenant that God made with Abraham and Sarah, and with Abraham and Sarah's descendants. And the Hebrew phrase for establishing a covenant in Hebrew is hakimoti briti. Hakimoti, the root in Hebrew, lakum, or lehakim, in this case, the causative, means to essentially stand something up. Right? So the word in Hebrew to establish something means to stand something up upon which other things can be built. And so we need to, in essence, take the inspiration of King's words to remember that the challenge is not done. It's never really done until there is justice for all, until ultimately we have created a society which does not base itself on hatred, on small-mindedness, on bigotry, on self-aggrandizement, but instead builds itself off of these core Torah concepts, these core concepts of our shared tradition. And ultimately speaking, the responsibility in our case, in the case of God reminding us of the establishment of that covenant, that we have to remind each other of both the existing covenantal relationship between human beings and the need to establish a stronger relationship, a stronger brit, that we ourselves now have to be in this role of standing up a covenantal relationship that will be the underpinnings of a society that we have not yet created together. And as we've talked about, we know the division is there. So the question that King ultimately asks is, where do we go from here? Where do you go when society feels so broken, when we feel so torn apart, where we are fighting amongst each other? And ultimately speaking, his answer is you have to go back to the core. You have to go back to the things upon which our most ideal version of society is established. And the covenant in this country exists as well. It's not a religious covenant, so to speak, but it's a covenant of civility. It is a covenant of societal obligation to one another. And that, ultimately speaking, is so much of what animated King's work, that the work of justice was to, again, strengthen and to even increase this covenantal idea between human beings. And in this country, we are uniquely positioned. The hope of it is that we are uniquely positioned and uniquely situated in such a way that we can become a model for, instead of what we have become recently, which is really an example of a cautionary tale of what happens when we take our attention away, in which we convince ourselves that the challenges of the time have been addressed and we can move on. King's words in 1967 to his people were, we may have had some success, but there is much still left to do. The reality is those words still apply today. We don't have an answer exactly of where it is we go from here, but one thing we know for certain is that the path we have taken to get us to this point has clearly not worked, that we have allowed too many of the bridges to be burned, too many of the relationships to be broken, that we have ceased to be able to see the humanity in each other, and we have a lot of work to do in that regard. So when we get to certainly this Shabbat, and on Monday as well, as I've said before, my best suggestion to all of us is to find time over this weekend to study King's words in themselves, right? In themselves, to find something that perhaps you haven't read before. Go to, as I said, the website, go to any number of places and find something and read it and contemplate it and think about, if King were alive today and could possess a message to give to all of us, an inspirational message, what is it for each of us? And how can we take that and actualize it? How can we work upon it? And I think that as I said, certainly last week felt the despair of which he spoke, but I think increasingly realized that living in despair is a selfish act. In the end, it serves no one. It certainly doesn't serve the self. And at the end of the day, if we think that the answer to our problems is going to be screaming louder than the person with whom we disagree, I think we have seen that way has failed. We have to think of new ways. And as I said, we have to stand up a new kind of covenant. And I think that work begins now. So I hope that each of you over this weekend, as I said, will find some time to study, to think, to contemplate Dr. King's words. And I hope that as we continue on and as we begin to rebuild ourselves as a country, that we keep these words in mind, that we keep the ultimate task in mind, which is to create, to establish, to hold up, to ultimately speaking, to build upon the beautiful covenant of humanity upon which I think this country was founded and upon which I think we all can aspire. So with that, I wish each and every one of you a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll welcome Cantor Lauren back to our virtual bima here as we turn to page 586 at the very bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, latet gedula le'yotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishmechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkinu kahem, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. As we think of those who have passed in recent months and those we're remembering this week for Yahrzeit, I'll invite those who are in mourning, as those observing those yard sites, if you so choose, to rise. And we mark first those that have passed in our community in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Philip Idone, Phyllis Katz, Laura Kurz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Vera Shaps, Norma Small, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, Ann Weiss, and Marvin Weiss. We also mark the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Gladys Abraham, York Arke, Samuel Benziner, Daniel Bernstein, Leon Blaufarb, Nancy Copland, Donald Doctorow, Ernst Eckstein, Rose Goodstadt, Olive Hennefield, Esther Hirsch, Kurt Ivers, Harry Karp, Max Katz, Hy Cornfield, Joseph Lauder, Isabel Lewontin, Louis Lehner, Mark Mitchum, Rebecca Nevins, Kate Okun, Samuel Okun, Edna Pastor, Theodore Pearl, Saul Rubin, Murray Rudman, Lucille Siegel, Beverly Susser, Cindy Taylor, and Alan Tishman. In addition to those names, we think of all those that have been named in the chat as well, and anyone who is being remembered simply on our hearts and minds. And as I said, for those who so choose, you may rise as we all turn to page 598 and recite the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayichon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. B'agala u'v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'yomei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata u'shirata tishbachata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. And if you're standing, you may be seated. And just to wish everyone again a Shabbat Shalom. And we're now going to give Cantor Lauren a moment to relax, and we're going to turn it over to our wonderful board member, Roger Matloff, who is going to take over for me, and let's give him permission to speak. That's a very important piece of this. Sorry, give me 1 second. Matloff. There we go. Ask to unmute. See how that goes.
Unmute.
There he is. Roger, it's all you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. These are the weekly announcements for the week of January 15th. Shabbat morning services will be live streamed tomorrow at 10 a.m. Join us on our website, the YouTube channel, or the Facebook page. We have archived versions will be available for viewing shortly after each service ends. Then join us for the Torah study at 12 p.m. on Zoom with Rabbi Dan. Our favorite pianist singer, Keelan, returns for the musical Havdalah. That's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Ruth Joseph's book club is on Sunday at 11 a.m. Nida Mitzvah is on Monday at 11:30 a.m. So email Andrea Fagan 41@gmail.com for the Zoom link. There'll be no Hebrew school this Monday in commemoration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The Social Justice Committee will meet virtually on Monday at 5 p.m. That is before the 7 p.m. Zoom panel discussion on building beloved community. It's going to be moderated by Andrea Klausner with guest Rabbi Dan Geffen, Peter Geffen, and Reverend Kimberly Johnson. It is preceded by a 72-hour virtual screening of Shared Legacies, the African American and Jewish Civil Rights Alliance. On Tuesday at 5 p.m., check in with friends virtually for an informal chat with Just Music with Myra and Shelley. Rabbi Dan's class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets is on Wednesday at 12 p.m. and the B'nai Mitzvah class meets that day at 4 p.m. On Thursday at 4 p.m., we take another online tour at the Museum of Jewish People with another exhibit, this one on Jewish humor. I recommend that. The last one was very, very good. On Friday at 9 a.m. is Rabbi Dan's class on Pirkei Avot. Check out all of these and all the programs in our weekly e-blast and on our website calendar. If you're not getting the emails, please let the temple office know. We welcome you to join us after services tonight on a virtual oneg. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, Roger. You did great.
Thanks.
I'm officially deputizing you as a rabbi from now forward. I think you're going to do wonderfully. Excellent, excellent job. So we'll let you get back to being comfortable, and I will bring back, let's see, Cantor Lauren to join me and spotlight myself. Okay, I think we're back together again. Roger, thank you again. And just for those that have signed up for Monday night's program already, you should have already received the link for the video. As Roger said, you can watch it anytime over the next 72 hours. You don't have to watch it for 72 hours straight, but you can watch it at any time. You can still sign up until Monday. The film is accessible, I think, until 5 o'clock on Monday. At this point, if you register, you should get an immediate response from Zoom. And in the response will be a link to the video as well. If you have any problems, certainly let me know, and I'll respond after Shabbat's over. But we'll be very excited to see you. And just as Roger said, that great exhibit at Beit HaTfutzot at the Museum of the Diaspora in Tel Aviv. For any of you that were on the Israel trip with me and my dad a few years ago, it feels like a lifetime ago, that was actually one of the last things we did before we got on the plane to come home, was to go and see that exhibit. And it's amazing in real life, and I'm sure it will be wonderful as well. So Roger, thanks again for doing this. It's great to have our board participating. And Cantor Lauren, I think we're going to have a closing song before we do Kiddush tonight, right?
That is correct.
And we'll turn now to page 123 for Kiddush. If you have a wine glass or a grape juice glass or some Kiddush cup nearby, please join with me again. We're on page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. Veshabat kocho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lemase v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh zecher letziat mitzrayim ki banu v'chata ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim veshabat kochecha Me'ahava uratzon inchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. L'chaim, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. We'll switch it back over to gallery, and we'll say goodbye